All right, I got it on Twitter.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special episode of Bruin Dash. My name is Jack Perez, and I'm joined today by King Jemison from Cardinal Dash. How you doing today, man?
I am doing great. I mean, I can't believe this is the last week of the season, but I'm really excited to talk about it with you. And since both of us are going to be at the game, we got a special stake in this one.
Oh, yeah, it's the big one this week. End of the season for both teams. Both have opted out of their bowl games, but UCLA and Stanford are playing this week, week 7. It's going to be quite a good one. UCLA coming off a rough loss to USC, whereas Stanford, the road nomads, have won 3 straight, looking to make that 4 and end the season with a winning record. We're going to be talking about what the team's chances are in this game. We're going to be talking about how the Pac-12 has been operating with these bowl games since a lot of teams have been opting out. And we're going to talk about key matchups and predictions later on in the show. But first of all, Stanford has played since the beginning of December out of state, been practicing in the Northwest. Now they're in Santa Barbara, luckily, getting out of that cold weather, coming to a nice place in Santa Barbara. What are your thoughts on how the Cardinals have adapted to this awkward situation? I mean, they've won 3 in a row, so that's a good sign. But how have they looked in that time span?
Well, Jack, I think that this might be a matchup of, to me, the teams who are probably the second and third best in the Pac-12 at this point in the season. Do they deserve to be slotted second and third best because of the entirety of the season? No, but over the past few weeks, I think both Stanford and UCLA have played really well, and for some reason, the Cardinal have gotten better as they hit the road. And I think part of that is, I mean, the Davis Mills false positive scenario has been well documented, but this team was not at full strength at the beginning. They don't have Mills for the Oregon game, and he doesn't practice for the Colorado game and looked extremely rusty. And he's just really settled in and has played fantastic in the past few games. But more than that, I think this team is kind of bonded and rallied around this road dogs mentality over the past few weeks. And, I think it's a shared experience. I guess athletes on campus around the country, and particularly in the Pac-12, aren't able to do much anyway. It's not like they're seeing all their friends and going to class and living a normal life. But I think it's particularly, there's a particular bonding that can take place when you're just hitting the road and you got nothing to do but hang with your teammates and play football. And so it's really brought the best out of them. And I think has shown Stanford that last year was a fluke. 4-8 season was a fluke, and that this team is going to build towards a much brighter future.
Yeah, and you talk about last season being a fluke. UCLA's last 2 years have been anything but that. They've looked like a really bad team, and their record has shown that. But, I mean, I was up all night trying to think of ways that this team has been improved, and it's all over the board. Chip Kelly's looked like he's been a more adaptive head coach besides on 4th down. For some reason, he still wants to run the ball up the middle every time. DTR has looked like a better quarterback. Besides a couple of turnovers here and there, he's looked really efficient. Demetric Felton has taken that running back role and made it his own. The wide receivers, tight ends, the entire defense has looked a lot better. So going into this game, you have to expect – you said the teams are probably second and third best. UCLA might be the second best team in this conference. And other than a close loss to Colorado where 4 turnovers in the first half really killed them, a tough loss against Oregon where DTR was ruled out in the middle of the week. So they handed to Chase Griffin in his first career start. Any redshirt freshman going up to Autzen is not going to have a good time. And besides a pick 6 to end the first half, UCLA probably wins that game because they only end up losing by 3. And then last week against USC, just completely blowing up in that second half. UCLA might be about 4 or 5 plays away from being undefeated and competing for the conference championship. But they're in this 3rd seeded game. Colorado finished ahead of them. USC obviously finished ahead of them in the South. But for most of the season, UCLA has looked like the more talented team out there. And that's a big step up, especially considering last year, for most of the season, they looked like the worst team every time they went out. Even in that Stanford game, they played pretty well, and they got a win, which, as someone that's watched UCLA almost my entire life, losing about 11 straight times is really rough to any team, but especially to a team in California that even in the years where it seemed like UCLA was the better team, they just couldn't get over the hump of beating the Cardinal, of finally getting that one win. But last year they were able to do it. And I think that provided a real bouncing off point for this UCLA team to come into the season and possibly finish with an over 500 record for the first time under Chip Kelly.
Golly, last year's Stanford UCLA game was one of the ugliest football games I have ever watched. And poor Jack West, he was our third string quarterback last year. He's probably third string this year because I assume Tanner McKee's kind of the primary backup at this point. But he looked like a third stringer. It was one of the worst quarterback forms that I've ever seen. He improved tremendously when he got the call against Oregon. He played pretty well, honestly, in that opener. But Stanford just had no chance with him having no experience under center, and UCLA ran all over the Cardinal, and that's really going to be, to me, we'll talk more about this later, but whether UCLA can repeat that kind of rushing performance is going to determine this game. But I think you're exactly right on Chip Kelly and his improvement. I would assume you would say he's kind of bought himself some time. He definitely came into this season on a hot seat, at least perspective. I don't know what the UCLA booster funding situation is like, whether they could afford to fire him, but it certainly seemed like it might have been justified. And at this point, I would say he's building towards something bigger. And the same is probably true of Stanford. Both of these teams can play a lot of what ifs on their season. I think it's safe to say for Stanford, we discussed this on our show earlier this week. Had Davis Mills been able to practice before the Colorado game and not been totally rusty, they probably play better in the first half and they probably win that game since they lost by only 3. And that took a big fourth quarter comeback to even get to that margin. And then if they were there, they would be 4-1 and in the Pac-12 championship game. But personally, I'm very happy with the Cardinal ending their season in the Rose Bowl. I know it's not a New Year's Six bowl game, but to get to play a rival and to get to play in such a historic venue, in a place where Stanford has enjoyed a lot of success over the past few years, there was no better ending besides winning the Pac-12.
Yeah, and obviously this is a huge historic rivalry. These teams love to play each other. I mean, anytime UCLA plays any other California team, whether it's USC, Cal, Stanford, it's a big game. And to end it at home, obviously once you knew Stanford was the opponent, there was no way it was going to be played up in Palo Alto because of the COVID restrictions. But it's nice to play in the Rose Bowl. It's a good stadium, other than the fact that there's going to be no fans there. And if it is still the host stadium for a college football playoff, that's probably going to cause a lot of problems. But that's probably a topic for teams that actually have a chance to get there. UCLA and Stanford aren't on that level yet. But I want to go back to what you said about Chip Kelly. Yeah, he's probably bought himself some time. And there were reports earlier this week that were unfounded, in my opinion, that the new athletic director, Martin Jarman, was looking to possibly move on from Chip Kelly in the later months of 2021 and try to find his own guy, which I've been saying a little bit on this show in past weeks, months, that I think the team does need to move on from Chip Kelly. But he has bought himself time. Getting over 500 with this team, even in a shortened season, is a big accomplishment. And the athletic director immediately came out and said, yeah, these reports are all false. I don't think we can fire Chip Kelly this year, even if we wanted to. There's no money. There's a massive deficit. Thankfully, Jordan and Nike have come in to be a sponsorship for next year. UCLA had a pretty good national signing day earlier this week, but overall, this team is heading in the right direction, but there's still going to be a lot of improvement. And I don't think Chip Kelly is that coach to take them over that hump, whereas David Shaw, in my opinion, is a much better head coach and has proved it time and time again, especially over the past few years. Yes, he's had a couple of rough seasons, but you know what you're getting with him, and you know it's usually going to be a successful team.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that. We were complaining about David Shaw a lot last season and into this season, but I think he's made major strides over the past few weeks. And part of it is we've seen a lot more creativity on offense while also maintaining that Stanford identity of playing physical football, of rolling out extra offensive linemen and just trying to run the football down your throat. But then they've been creative with using the screen game, something that Stanford seemed to be allergic to in past years, and just getting the ball to playmakers in space. And you find out that if you recruit 4-star wide receivers and give them the ball, they're usually going to be able to get a gain no matter where you get it to them. So I think that that's shown a lot of adaptation and flexibility, which is not something I would say is Shaw's strength. And that's what you have to do to win in college football these days. Look at Nick Saban. He started this decade talking about how hurry-up offenses were going to ruin the game, and now he's running one of the most prolific hurry-up offenses in the country. And I think that David Shaw is never going to get there, but at the very least, he's proven that he can adapt. And I guess with Chip Kelly, to me, I think the on-field product this year has improved tremendously. But his approach to recruiting is what I'm sure is frustrating to UCLA fans. UCLA should be a place they can sign top 20 classes. I mean, you are situated in the most talent-rich area in the country, or at least one of them. And I mean, it's such a big brand. You get to play every game in the Rose Bowl, get a great education. And the fact that he's just out there signing a bunch of 3 stars year in and year out and not even seeming to work that hard to do it, that's where I wonder if college coaching is really a good fit for him anymore. Doesn't seem like he wants to work hard. Will say his offense has picked up tremendously this season.
Yeah, it's really like, does he know that you have to do multiple things when you're a head coach? You have to both coach on the field and off the field. That's a little rough sometimes for Chip Kelly, but you know, winning cures all, and that's a big thing if UCLA is able to win. Speaking of wins, let's move on to our next topic. A lot of Pac-12 teams have already opted out of going to a bowl game, even if they're invited. The Pac-12 really only has 4 tie-in bowls left after a couple of the California Bowl games decided just to not run this year. King, what are your thoughts on how the Pac-12 is approaching this bowl season?
Well, it seems like the Pac-12 kind of got screwed by outside factors to begin with because so many of those bowl games in the Pac-12 footprint and with Pac-12 tie-ins have been canceled. And I assume the Pac-12 did not have anything to do with those decisions, but Red Box Bowl couldn't be played, LA Bowl couldn't be played, Vegas Bowl couldn't be played, Sun Bowl couldn't be played. And all of these are ones the Pac-12 was counting on if you were going to get a full bowl slate. But frankly, I don't think it's a bad thing that Stanford and UCLA aren't playing a bowl game. If we look at what these 2 teams in particular and the other California teams have gone through over the past few months, they've been totally locked away, not able to see anyone outside of the team, and really just, truly living, sleeping, eating football 24/7. And for Stanford, they've been on the road since the start of this month and just living out of hotels and practicing at high schools. And I just can't imagine doing that over the holidays of having to spend Christmas and let's say, I mean, I love the Independence Bowl, but spending Christmas away from your in Shreveport, Louisiana, would be very, very difficult. It's a lot different if your families can attend and you can have a big Christmas party and all the bowl hoopla that usually happens. But when you're going to still be locked away with your team, that doesn't sound like a very enjoyable experience, nor does playing Army in a triple option offense that's just going to grind you throughout that game. So shout out to the Independence Bowl. Love the Carmody family that helps run that bowl. I wish Stanford was in it, but I can't blame Stanford and UCLA for wanting to get this over with because they've had to work really hard just to get to this point.
Right. It's truly madly, deeply infuriating that Larry Scott hasn't really said anything about this and he's leaving it up to the individual teams. At some point, Pac-12 leadership needs to step up and say, this is what's going to happen. Yes, obviously there's a reason that USC, Colorado, Oregon haven't opted out because they all believe that they're going to go to bowl games. But these 500 teams, that you need to give them some sort of direction. Tell them whether they're allowed to go, because speaking to players and Chip Kelly this week, it seemed like they were okay with the idea. Maybe they just didn't want to publicly say, no, we're not going to play in a bowl game, or yes, we're 100% going to play in a bowl game. But they all seem kind of open to it. If you want to go, you should be allowed to go. But at some point, Larry Scott should have come out and said, listen, we're all going to go and we're going to hold every single bowl game to a Pac-12 standard of COVID testing. Because at the moment, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we've seen it in basketball for a lot of these non-conference games. They're just getting canceled because the Pac-12 has stricter testing protocols and these other teams just can't keep up with it. And then all of a sudden, the games are canceled because of not even just positive tests, but just because the protocols are different. And, some teams don't get them back as quickly as the Pac-12 is able to. If you're able to do this well, it should be a nice, easy transition into bowl season. Who knows when these bowls are even going to be played because it's already so late in December. These should be starting up this weekend, if not next week. But at some point, Pac-12 leadership needs to step up, do something, and say, yes, these teams are going to be allowed to go, these teams aren't, and then let those teams make the decision at that point. Because right now, for a UCLA and Stanford who both could qualify for these bowl games, it's a little unfair for them to have to make these decisions themselves.
Yeah, and right now there's only 4 Pac-12 bowls left, I believe. And so there's so many teams, like let's say Arizona State wins this week, gets to 2-2. Technically they're bowl eligible. I don't believe they've opted out. I'm sure they would like to play another game because they've played so few this season. But I mean, there's probably not going to be one available to them unless another bowl with other conference ties decides to slot them in. So that's where you're right. There needs to be leadership, and obviously we say this all the time about the Pac-12. The lack of leadership is really confounding and is one of the things that holds the conference back relative to other Power 5 conferences. But I mean, just thinking out loud, you're going to see the winner of the Pac-12 championship go to a New Year's Six bowl. Uh, Probably Colorado if USC wins, or USC if Oregon wins the Pac-12 championship will slot into the Alamo Bowl. And then there's two other bowls laying around there that will have Pac-12 tie-ins, and that's it. So I mean, probably the only teams that are going to get that opportunity to begin with are Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and USC in some order. Maybe you see somebody else jump Oregon if they lose to fall to 3-3. But the point is, there are so few teams that are going to have an opportunity. The number of tie-ins that you need to just have Larry Scott come out and say, this is what we're working with this season. We've got four bowls. The four teams at the top of the standings right now can continue prepping for bowl season. The rest of y'all can know that this game will be your last of the season, because I think that's valuable. It certainly is something that is valuable for Stanford and UCLA to know that, hey, we've already opted out of a bowl game, so this is our bowl game. And I think both teams are going to play really hard, and give one of their best performances of the season, because they know that this is the end of a very long and hard journey.
Right. And that's really what this has all been about is this has been a tough season for every single team, whether it was no spring training camp, whether it was no summer camp, whether it was coming back a little bit in the summer and then getting it canceled on you, whether it was getting the new schedule all of a sudden in end of September, beginning of October, and you're playing in the beginning of November now. As every other team already around the country starts to play. This has been a tough season for Pac-12 teams, and they deserve to go out on a high note, whether it is in a big bowl game or against a conference rival. I wish it worked out for UCLA and Stanford because obviously they're conference rivals, but I wish it would have worked out for other teams to have been able to face a rival. And then maybe next week, I know they still thought they were going to be in the college football playoff conversation, but once we knew they were only playing 6-7 games at most, I think they should have tried to scrap those plans and really just build an interesting schedule for teams, because I've been saying it since day one on the show when they announced that the week 7 was going to be just probably a game that was cross-divisional. I wanted to play Stanford. That was the team that we needed to play. Sam said Berkeley, and we ended up playing them just on the off chance because Utah had to cancel and Berkeley's already down in the South. So I wanted to play Stanford, and we got that. But that should have been from day one. Larry Scott needs to learn what the fans want. It's got to be you. It's got to be this team that we're playing. It's from day one they should have known. Okay, USC is going to play Stanford Cal the last week of the season, and UCLA is also going to play Stanford Cal the last week of the season, because neither one of those teams is going to make the college football playoff. We've seen USC has been stuck at like 13, even though they've been undefeated. Larry Scott, as always, has not really been keeping up to snuff. And it's even worse that we'll see if any of these games are on Pac-12 Network this weekend. Luckily, UCLA Stanford is on ESPN due to some time rejiggering. But I don't know. This has been a complete and utter failure of Pac-12 leadership once again.
Yeah, and it really takes away from what I think has been, dare I say, a successful season given all the restrictions and the challenges that Pac-12 teams have faced. Honestly, the fact that UCLA is about to play its 7th game and Stanford's about to play its 6th game is pretty impressive. And the fact that neither of these teams themselves have enjoyed or suffered any COVID problems this entire slate, I mean, they should be rewarded for that with a good matchup. And I think that applies to other teams as well. I mean, I feel horrible for Colorado. I mean, they absolutely got hosed by the Pac-12 by making them wait until Thursday to be on the hook in case USC had to cancel. Well, that gives them no time to schedule, and I believe Colorado State may have been available to them, so they could have played a rival outside of the conference. And instead, they have had no COVID problems all season, and yet they're only going to have played 5 games. So the lack of leadership has caused so many problems for the conference in the past, and it's caused them again this season. And like I said, other than that, I think that there's a lot of success stories. I mean, USC, I know this is tough for both of us to hear as Stanford and UCLA folks, but I mean, USC seems to be rising back to where USC should be, near the top of the conference, at the top of the conference. We've seen a lot of teams play almost their full slate or their entire slate of games. We've seen teams like Stanford and UCLA improve tremendously over the course of the season and provide a lot of hope and optimism for next season. And yet the story is just going to be the Pac-12 hurt itself, first of all, by canceling too soon. I said that right away, that the Pac-12 should have waited if possible, and certainly the bringing it back at the last second and waiting to resume the season until November 7th. That was a blunder, in my opinion, because you put yourself behind the eight ball. If you wanted to be serious about making the college football playoff, you needed to start at least by October 24th when the Big Ten did, and they just could not meet that deadline. And then if you aren't going to be serious about making the college football playoff, that's totally fine. The Pac-12 probably shouldn't be worried about that to begin with. They need to be worried about gathering respect at a smaller level first. And so then, like you said, give the most interesting schedule possible. Use that December 26 window. I mean, I don't want these players to have to stay for Christmas, but if they wanted to, get more rivalry games in. Let's see UW and Washington State. Let's see an Apple Cup. But that's not the focus of the Pac-12. Pac-12 is still pretending to be one of the other power conferences when they're so far away from that, at least in football.
Yeah, and it's really put a cloud over the season, which has featured a couple of really good games. I mean, UCLA USC last week with 2 lead changes in the final minute. The Stanford Cal game where there was a blocked extra point to win the game for Stanford. All those should be remembered as great games, but this cloud over the season has really has kind of dimmed those lights. As great as those games were, they're not going to be remembered as classically as other ones just because there was no real implications at the end. But moving on from that to our final topic of the day, predictions, key matchups for this game. King, I'll start with you. What are your top matchups that you're looking for when Stanford faces UCLA?
Well, I hinted at this earlier, but I think the matchup of UCLA's rushing offense, which is second in the Pac-12, averaging well over 200 yards a game, against Stanford's rushing defense, which is arguably better than their passing defense, but still not very good at all. I mean, that's where this game is going to be won, because if UCLA is able to just grind up Stanford on the ground, then I don't think there's much Stanford can do to win this game, because they're not going to have the ball enough. They're going to be falling behind early, and UCLA can build on that lead rather than throwing it away as they have the past couple times out. And this is going to come down to whether Stanford can play up front like they have in the past 3 weeks, or whether they're going to play like they did in the first couple weeks where they were getting pushed around by everyone and not getting any pressure on the quarterback, not able to maintain, contain, and really not able to stop running backs before they were 3 or 4 yards down the field at minimum. And I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson's running ability is going to be a big part of this. Stanford is terrible defending mobile quarterbacks, and DTR tore us up last year. And that's, I think, something that Chip Kelly is going to try to do again. I'd expect to see lots of designed runs. I would expect to see DTR being pretty quick to scramble. If there's nothing going on downfield, he's probably going to take off. And Stanford's team speed on defense is not great. I think that they've shown some improvement among the guys that maybe aren't as talented, but have gotten some more playing time this season. And yet still, DTR is probably faster than a lot of those guys. So there's going to be windows. And if he's able to scramble for 100 yards and UCLA is able to run for well over 200 yards, I think that there's not much Stanford can do to win this game.
Yeah, I'm actually going to look on the other side of the ball because UCLA has improved massively on defense this year, especially on their pass defense. Other than when they faced USC last weekend and ran into the Keaton Slovis chainsaw, because he tore them up, especially in the second half. They looked like they were okay, especially first quarter, second quarter, a little bit of leeway. But then that last half, Keaton Slovis ripped them apart. And it's not been as bad as a passing defense as last year, because last year they were second to last in the nation in yards allowed per game through the air. But they dropped from about a top 50 unit to maybe a top 80 now. So that's going to be a key point to see if they can stop Mills through the air. Stanford is not world beaters on offense, but UCLA's defense, especially in the past few years under Jerry Azzanaro, haven't been that good. So if they can continue to take a step forward and show that they're not the defense that faced off against USC, and not the defense that really faced off against Colorado for quite a bit of that game, then they should be able to take this one easily. If not, if the defense lets Stanford's offense continue to control the clock, control the game, and keep it out of DTR's hands as much as possible, UCLA is going to struggle. They haven't really had that many opportunities to struggle this year, other than when they face good quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels didn't do that well, but in the second half of that game, Jaden Daniels looked like they were coming back. Grant Gunnell got hurt on the first play of the game. Tyler Shutt is a freshman and got exposed later on in the year, so he wasn't that good. This is going to be a big matchup for UCLA's defense. And when you have a good passing defense, the rushing defense will come along. Because if you can expect the run, you'll be able to stop that. And what makes UCLA beautiful is their defense able to win the games. When you look back at the early 2010s, yes, they didn't beat Stanford, but when they were going 8-5, 10-3 in some of these seasons, it was their defense leading the way, and then their quarterback and their offense just had to take care of the ball and finish the job. So we'll move on from that. What is your prediction for the game? What is your prediction basically for the end of Stanford's season?
Yeah, and I just want to go back to one of the things you said earlier. I mean, I don't know how dynamic Stanford's passing offense is going to be, but I can tell you that Davis Mills is at least the second best quarterback that UCLA will face this season. I mean, he's the second highest rated player offensively in the Pac-12 according to Pro Football Focus, behind Drew Dahlman, his center at Stanford. And I think that in the past few games, he's just been so efficient. He doesn't necessarily have the type of wide receiver talent that Slovis has at USC. I mean, I think USC might have 3 wide receivers better than anybody else in the Pac-12, but he's been able to make the most of what he's got. Semi Vahoko is a really big outside threat who can really burn you deep because of how he can high point the football. But mostly, Mills has just been very accurate, choosing the right spots, and hasn't thrown an interception since big game last year. So I think he's over 200 passing attempts without an interception. And if that continues, that's where Stanford can really move the ball quickly on UCLA's defense, is whether they can get some of those big plays that USC did. But as for my prediction, I think UCLA is going to win the game. I would take Stanford against the spread, and I did take Stanford against the spread for my dash picks, which were horrible to start the season, but have gotten better over the course of the past 3 weeks. I think it's something like 27-24. And I think it's going to be a game where the only way this becomes a blowout on either side is if one team jumps out to a big lead, because both of these teams can run the football really well. And even though they've both given up leads at times this season, I think that they can also step on your throat with a lead, the way they run the ball. But I think it's going to be more back and forth than that. I think we're going to see some scoring early, then kind of a cooling off period, and then UCLA makes one more play than Stanford because they're at home. They want to get to that 4-3 winning season mark. And I think, frankly, no matter how this game finishes, as long as it's a close game, both teams are going to feel pretty good about the way this season has gone.
Yeah, I don't have it quite that close. I think, like you said, both teams are going to start out strong, but I think UCLA's defense is going to prevent Stanford from really scoring in that first half. I think Chip Kelly is going to show exactly what all UCLA fans wanted from him early on when he first was hired. I mean, I was a big Chip Kelly fan. What makes you beautiful is how you're able to adapt to games. You know, how you're able to adapt at halftime, how you're able to adapt before the game's coming in. Chip Kelly has done that relatively well, especially when he had to throw in Chase Griffin for a couple games, when his defenses were giving up a lot of points in the first half, especially in the fourth quarter before the USC game. UCLA had only given up one fourth quarter touchdown all season. Yes, they collapsed last week, but that's against a very talented USC team and they hadn't faced an air raid offense like that since last year at Washington State, where they also gave up 63 points. Where they were able to come away with the win there because of some miracle, but you can't have a repeat game like that, and I don't think Chip Kelly will. I think Chip Kelly's going to buy himself some more time in Westwood through this game. I think it's going to be quite a big lead for UCLA, and then they're going to kind of lay off in the fourth quarter. Stanford might or might not be able to get back in, but they're going to lay off in the fourth quarter, give their seniors one last chance to play in the Rose Bowl if they're not going to come back next year. I'm going to go with UCLA 31, Stanford 17, and I really hope that Nicholas Barmira kicks a 50-yard field goal and they play the best song ever, which is I Love LA, and UCLA leaves that field with a win.
Like I said, I think that it is a special experience to get to have your final game in the Rose Bowl, to get to have a senior day. I think that you're more confident in UCLA than I am. I mean, it seems like these two teams can only play close games. I mean, every Stanford game outside the Oregon game was decided within, I believe, one possession, and that Oregon game was not as lopsided as the score indicated. There were 4 missed field goals, and you had a backup quarterback, and both teams were over 400 yards. So I think it's going to be a close game either way. And to me, the difference is which quarterback plays better and which team is able to establish the run at a greater level, because I think that's what both of these teams want to do. And though these quarterbacks are very different in their style, they've been pretty similar in their success this season. And we'll see who wins that battle and kind of sets himself up for a potentially really good quarterback battle and quarterback state in California next season.
Yeah, and all we're hoping for is a good game on Saturday. All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you, King, for joining me. Check him out on Cardinal Dash. He does a great job over there. Keep following us on Bruin Dash. Follow all these shows on Dashboards TV. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have our own website at dashsports.tv. All of our shows, clips are there. We also have a partnership with Sports Pac-12 where we write columns for them. Check them out. They've been a great partner with us all season. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up for us.